I figured out the key to unlocking my win rate in live poker. I go all in a ridiculous amount. In fact, I bet if you took 5 random people watching this video, I put the chips in the middle more in one session than all 5 of them combined.
Okay, congrats, Mark. You go all in a lot. How does that help?
Good question. I'm gonna show you when you should be going all in much more with your value, when you should be going all in much more with your bluffs, and why, when playing against a human, you should almost never be balanced. For the nerds, like me, I'll show you how to use a solver to figure this out. But if you don't have a solver or just don't like using them, I'll show you a shortcut to do all of this, no solver required. And by the end of this video, you are going to be an all-in hound. That's a new poker term, all-in hound. All right, you ready? Let's jump in. All right, so this is the hand that gave me the idea for this video, and this is very similar to a hand that I recently played. So we are playing 2-5, and under the gun limps. Now the hijack makes it 25. We 3-bet in the cutoff with king, queen of spades. The limper is going to fold, and the original raiser is going to call. We're going to a flop, which comes 10-8-3. So when he checks it over, I'm just c-betting my entire range small here, and he calls. Turn is going to bring in a flush completing card, a 2 of diamonds. And when the preflop caller checks it over here, I am asking, is this player capped or uncapped? Well, on this turn, they can have a lot of flushes because in general, live players play their flush draws passively on the flop. So on this turn, they are uncapped. So with my bluffs here with a hand like king, queen of spades, and even with my value here, if I had a hand like ace 5 of diamonds, I would be going small on this turn because it's going to incentivize our opponent to raise when they have a flush themselves. And it's going to incentivize our opponent to call with a bunch of their weak stuff, which is really nice when we have a bluff because we can get that weak stuff to fold on the river. And it's really nice when we have value to capture another street versus the weak stuff. They're still going to put in more money for us when they have these strong hands. So we're going to go small on this turn, 100 into 262, and our opponent is going to call. Now going to the river, it is an innocuous 4 of hearts. And when our opponent checks over on the river here, well, when we c-bet small on the flop, our opponent's going to raise a high percentage of the time on a wet dynamic board when they have hands like pocket 10s, pocket 8s, 10-8 suited. So our opponent doesn't really have sets in 2 pair. And then on the turn when we bet small, well, our opponent's going to raise once again a lot of the time when they have flushes. Now occasionally they'll trap with the nut flush, but getting to this river, our opponent is relatively capped, right? They don't have a lot of flushes, they don't have a lot of sets, they don't have a lot of 2 pair. Most of our opponent's range getting to this river is going to be 1 pair hands. So let's kind of pull up their range on this river and figure out if it's a good spot to jam for value or a good spot to jam as a bluff. So this is my approximation of their range getting to the river. Remember, they ISO'd over a limp and then they called the 3-bet, called a small bet on the flop, called a small bet on the turn, and now we get to the river. So the range is going to be a lot of top pair, maybe some slivers of ace high flushes. Remember, again, a lot of their flushes would just raise on the turn when they got there, but we'll give them the sliver, a few combos of flushes. They're gonna have some pocket 9s with a diamond, maybe some pocket 7s with a diamond, a couple combos of 8x. Not sure these hands would always isolate pre-flop over a limp. Then maybe some open in straight draws. Again, not sure these hands would always isolate pre-flop over a limp. And then we're going to give them some ace king and ace queen off with the ace of diamonds or king of diamonds. And then finally, they're going to have some overpairs here. So pocket jacks would probably play this way all the time. And then pocket queens, we'll give them half the queens, maybe queens 4-bet some of the time, maybe queens check raise on the flop 10% of the time, something like that. So on this river, we gave ourselves the option to jam, to bet 775, and we gave ourselves the option to bet very small, so 150, just about 30% pot here. And when we bet 775, when we jam on this river, here is our opponent's response in equilibrium. They're supposed to fold pocket jacks 50% of the time. So if they have jacks without a diamond on this river, that is supposed to be a pure fold. They're supposed to fold ace 10 suited 100% of the time when we jam on this river. I'm starting to get a feeling here without doing any node blocking that our opponent is probably not folding these hands at 100% frequency when we overbet jam on the river. Even though our opponent is mostly capped to 1 pair, even though the flushes come in, even though we are betting massive on this river, I would not trust our opponents to fold over pairs here or top pair, top kicker more than 50% of the time. So we already know what the answer is going to be, but I just want to demonstrate here if we just go in and do some light node blocking and we just have our opponent call with pocket jacks maybe 75% of the time, and we have them call with ace 10 suited maybe 50-50, we have them call with the king 10 suited maybe 50-50, and then we have them call with the queen 10 and jack 10 suited maybe 25% of the time. We'll also have them fold the ace king off here on this this river, I don't think that hand is calling. And you see here now is our adjusted response on the river. If we just have our opponent's call with jacks and ace 10 suited a little bit more here. You see here whenever we have value on this river, a hand like pocket queens, pocket kings, ace king of diamonds, we are just now overbet jamming. And whenever we have a bluff like king queen of spades or a hand like 7-6 of hearts, the solver just prefers to bet very, very small on the river, because when we bet small, we can get our opponent to fold hands like ace king or ace queen with a diamond here on this river, or even occasionally a hand like pocket 7s or pocket 9s, and we're getting a very, very, very good price on our bluff. All right, so I promised I would show you how to do this without a solver, so here we go. All we have to do is ask what is their range on the river, and usually our opponent's range is going to be bucketed into 3 main categories. They're going to have weak stuff and misdraws, or they're going to have strong stuff and misdraws, or they're going to have strong stuff, weak stuff, and misdraws. So again, we're just being very, very broad with their range getting to the river. And when I say one of these categories, they have to comprise more than 10% of their range. If they just have maybe a sliver of weak stuff, like in this particular hand we just talked about, well, maybe they have pocket 7s or pocket 9s, and that is their weak stuff, but it's less than 10% of their range. So mostly our opponent's range getting to this river, because they have a lot of overpairs, they have a lot of top pair, top kicker, is going to be mostly strong stuff and missed draws. So this is when we want to go big for value and small as a bluff. When our opponent's range is mostly strong stuff and missed draws, like in this last example, we want to go very, very big to get called by the strong stuff. And even if our opponent is capped, that doesn't mean they're folding their strongest stuff on the river necessarily. As we saw in this last hand, our opponent's probably not going to fold jacks or queens or ace 10 suited at a high frequency on this river, even though the flush got there. We also want to go small to fold out their missed draws, like ace king with a diamond or ace queen with a diamond. And in this particular spot, they are going to call more than equilibrium because they have a strong range getting to the river. And if you have a very strong range getting to the river in equilibrium, some of that strong stuff gets folded, but people in game, humans, have a very hard time when they have a strong range just thinking, oh, you know what? I have a lot of strong hands here, so I'm going to fold some of my strong hands. That just doesn't happen. Okay, now I want to talk about a hand where the runout is the exact same, but the ranges are slightly different because of what happens pre-flop. So in this hand, let's say the under the gun player limps again, and now the villain, instead of ISOing, over limps. We are going to ISO with king queen of spades, and the villain is going to call. Flop comes 10-8-3. We're going to c-bet the size on the flop where they raise off their strong stuff, call out their weak stuff, usually around half pot in a single raise pot. I go a little bit smaller in a 3-bet pot, but in a single raise pot, we can size up a little bit more because the absolute size of the pot is smaller. So we go 50. Our opponent is going to call. Once again, on this turn, we are going to size down because our opponent is uncapped. We would love for them to raise their flushes right now and also continue with some of their weak stuff. So we are going to go 80 into 192 on this turn. Our opponent is going to call. Now the river is a 4. And when our opponent checks it over on this river, once again, should we be going all in with our bluffs like king queen of spades, or should we be going all in with our value here like a hand like ace queen of diamonds? All right, so first we have to ask, what is our opponent's range? And getting to this river in a pot where our opponent overlimped, their range is going to be slightly different. So here is the range I gave them, and you see here they have no overpairs. They're going to have less ace 10 suited because that hand would ISO. They're going to have a lot of his 10x offsuit type stuff. They're going to be a lot wider here. They're going to have a lot more 8x because this stuff makes sense to limp call pre. Maybe some of the suited ace X. They're going to have some of these maybe smaller ace high flushes that trap here. And now maybe instead of having ace king or ace queen with a diamond, maybe they'll have a hand like queen jack with a diamond, a hand that has a gut shot and a flush draw, or a hand like ace jack with the ace or jack of diamonds here. So once again, this is the range when they overlimp, call the raise pre-flop, call the small bet on the flop, call the small bet on the turn. And this was their range when they ISO, we 3-bet, and then the same thing happens post-flop. You see this range is much stronger. Here is their equilibrium response when we jam. Now you see with the ace 10 off, they're supposed to be calling about 78% of the time. With the ace 10 suited, calling about 66% of the time. Even with a hand like ace 8 suited here, they're supposed to be calling about 85% of the time. Yeah, they're still folding a lot of their weaker 10x, but because their range is so much weaker, now they're just calling with their top pair, top kicker a lot more here on this river. And they're also calling with second pair top kicker some on this river. So let's just go in, and the only change we're going to make here is that they're going to fold the ace 8 of hearts and ace 8 of clubs, and they're going to fold the pocket 6s aces here on this river. So we have them fold the ace-8 of hearts, we have them fold the ace-8 of clubs, and then we have them fold the pocket sixes. But just a couple tiny adjustments here now that a lot of our value hands like ace-king of diamonds, ace-queen of diamonds, pocket aces on this river, our value hands now want to choose a smaller size. They are not going all in here. Maybe they're not choosing the very small size, the third pot, because we still think we get called by 10x a lot of the time. Maybe if we just go like 250 on this river. So our value hands are mostly kind of choosing this smaller, maybe $250 on this river. And our bluffs specifically, like king, queen of spades, mostly want to use the all-in jam size because our opponent's range is weaker and we just think we can get more folds than equilibrium. All right, so let's go back to this handy dandy chart. What is their range? And on this river, our opponent mostly has a bunch of weak stuff and missed draws. Their strongest hand is going to be top pair, top kicker. They don't have over pairs. Maybe we think we can get the top pair medium kicker, top pair weak kicker to fold, even if they just don't fold the top pair top kicker. When our opponent has weak stuff and missed draws, we generally are going to want to go small with our value and big with our bluffs, which is the opposite of last hand because our opponent's range, once again, mostly weak stuff and missed draws. We want to go big to fold out all of the weak stuff and missed draws when we are bluffing, and we want to go small to get called by the weak stuff when we have value because we think our opponents are going to call less than equilibrium, whereas in the last example, we thought our opponent would call more than equilibrium. You don't need a solver to figure this out. Just ask, is our opponent's range mostly strong stuff and missed draws or mostly weak stuff and missed draws? And in this particular example, our opponent's range is much weaker because they don't have the overpairs. They don't have nearly as much top pair, top kicker. And so we just think our opponents can't withstand the heat on the river. And you may be thinking, well, 250, that is not a small size. But again, it is all relative, right? This would be a small size relative to our all-in. And when we are value betting, we want to choose the biggest size where we're going to get called by 10x, maybe pocket nines, maybe 8x, the majority of the time. So maybe 250, maybe 300, maybe even 350. The point here isn't that the size is small, absolutely. It's just that the size is going to be small relative to our all-in. All right, let's throw a little wrinkle on this. Let's go back to the first hand, and just like the first hand, the villain isolated, we 3-bet with king, queen of spades. The opponent calls, flop is the same. We c-bet small, our opponent calls, turn is the same. We continue small here to incentivize our opponent to raise off their flushes, continue with their weak stuff. We go 100, our opponent calls. And now the river, instead of being a blank, is an ace. Should we be going all in with our bluffs here, or should we be going all in with our value? So again, we have to consider our opponent's range getting to the river. And what is our opponent's range going to be when the river is an ace? Well, now our opponent makes some top pair top kicker with the ace king, makes some top pair second kicker with the ace queen, makes quite a bit of two pair here with the ace 10. Besides that, a lot of their other hands have been downgraded here. So queens, jacks, king 10 suited, queen 10 suited, etc. Our opponent's range isn't primarily strong stuff and misdraws. It's not primarily weak stuff and misdraws. It's going to be a combo here on this river. Our opponent is going to have some strong stuff, which is going to be their two pair, their top pair, top kicker. It's going to be some weak stuff, which is just going to be 10x. It's going to be an under pair or maybe pocket jacks and pocket queens that have now been downgraded. And it's still going to be the occasional misdraw like jack 9 suited, but not really much of that. Our opponent's range mostly on this river is going to be some strong stuff and some weak stuff. So as a little toy game, I gave us 3 sizes. I gave us the all-in size for 775. I gave us a very small size for 30% pot here. And I also gave us the in-between size for 300 or about 2/3 pot. So let's try this one without even using the solver. We're just going to brain solve here and let's do this in real time. So if we jam, what is our opponent going to call with? Well, I would say our opponent's probably not going to fold a hand like ace king with the ace of diamonds, ace queen with the ace of diamonds, or ace 10 suited. So we're mostly getting called by top pair and the ace 10 suited for 2 pair here on this river. Also, if we jam, we're probably getting the queens, the jacks, the king 10 suited, that type of stuff to fold as well. If we go very small, 30% pot, now we're probably getting called by everything, right? The ace 10 suited, the ace king, ace queen, those hands for sure are calling. I think we also maybe get looked up by queens or jacks here, at least some of the time. We probably get looked up by the king 10 suited, the queen 10 suited, at least some of the time here on this river. But our opponent may just fold occasionally if they have a misdraw like jack 9 suited or 9-7 suited, or if they did have a hand like queen jack with a diamond, our opponent would fold their draws, but in general, they'd probably call with their strong stuff and call with their weak stuff if we chose the small size. And then the middling size, this one is interesting because yes, we're still getting looked up by the ace 10, the ace king, the ace queen, of course, but I think for this size, the 2/3 pot, our opponent probably starts folding their queens, their jacks, their king 10 suited, their Jack 10 suited, they also, of course, are folding their misdraws, the Jack 9 suited, the Queen Jack with a diamond or something like that. So after talking about how their range responds, if we have value, if we have a hand like Queen Jack of diamonds or 7-6 of diamonds, we want to choose this large size to target when our opponent has hands like Ace 10, Ace King, Ace Queen that just aren't folding for a jam. Also, if we either had like the super nuts on this river, like Ace King of diamonds or Ace Queen of diamonds, or we had a thin value hand, Ace Queen with the Queen of diamonds or something like that, we may want to choose the small size to incentivize our opponent to call with some of their weaker holdings like pocket jacks or Jack 10 suited or Queen 10 suited. Because when we have the super nuts, a hand like Ace King of diamonds or Ace Queen of diamonds, well, it's going to be way less likely that our opponent has a hand like Ace King or Ace Queen with a diamond, and there's only a couple combos of that Ace 10 suited. So maybe we just want to target the weaker stuff in our opponent's range, the pocket queens, the pocket jack, that just aren't going to fold for the small size. If we start blasting here with a hand like Ace Queen with the Queen of diamonds, well, we're just folding out all the stuff that's worse, like a hand like jacks or queens. So when we have thin value, we also may want to go small for value. So our value here on this river wants to go either very big or very small. So that leaves the third option for our bluffs. So if we did have a bluff on this river, like King, Queen of spades, we may want to choose this middling size. And the great part about the middling size is we don't lose all the money whenever our opponents have the top of their range, like Ace 10 suited, but we've also bet enough here on this river to get our opponent to fold queens, jacks, King 10 suited, Queen 10 suited, Jack 10 suited, pocket nines, etc. So we get all of the weak stuff to fold, we lose the minimum against the top of the range, and we also get the draws to fold as well. So we want to go either very big or very small for value, and with the medium size for a bluff when our opponent's range is some strong stuff, some weak stuff, and some misdraws. We want to go big to get called by the very strong stuff, the top of our opponent's range, when we can beat that stuff. We want to go medium to fold out all of the weak stuff and misdraws when we are bluffing, and we also could consider going very, very small to get called by the weak stuff, either when we have the super nuts, when we think it's unlikely our opponent has a strong hand, or when we are just betting very, very thinly and we would like to get called by worse, so we can just give our opponent a very good price. So once again, you don't need a solver. All you've got to do, ask what is their range, and when our opponent has weak stuff and misdraws, we generally want to go small with value and big as the bluff. When our opponent has strong stuff and misdraws, we generally want to go big with value and small with the bluff. And when our opponent's range has some strong stuff, some weak stuff, and some misdraws, well, then we can either go big with value or small with value, and that's when we want to go medium with the bluff. So as you guys can see, we're not just indiscriminately going huge with our overbet bluffs and going small with our value. That is not the strategy at all, and I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions I see in the comment section. No, we are just responding to our opponent's range, and when our opponent has strong hands, that's when we go big with our value size, and when our opponent mostly has weak hands, that's when we go big with our bluff size. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video and you turn into all-in hounds on the river. Thank you guys and have a gentle day.